Bonjour, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Bienvenue, welcome. I'm not sure in which language I'm supposed to speak now because like it's gonna be translated maybe in French, in English. I will speak in English, it's gonna be the easiest way. We are very happy to host this afternoon the masterclass dedicated to Tatiana Huezo. Tatiana Huezo is a director that has been very close to Visions du Réel's heart for a really long time. She presented her film El Lugar Más Pequeño in 2011. It was a really important moment, I think, for all of us. And she came back a few years later to present her short film, Ausencias. We are very proud and honored to have the chance to spend time with her to discuss her work, which is, I'm not going to say too much because there will be much more elaborated said later, but a work that is definitely as political, as committed as it is sensitive and delicate and personal. So I think that it's a big achievement to manage to do all those things together in films. I would like to thank Tatiana Huezo also for waking up so early because it's a very early morning for her. So thanks a lot, Tatiana, for that. We wanted to make sure to reach as many people as possible, so I'm sure that's going to be the case. Also, to just let you know that the version on Facebook is going to be the one live translated in English. On YouTube, you can find Spanish, French, and English. And on the website of the festival, at the forum page, you can find English and French, respectively, on both pages. I also want to take this opportunity to thank and welcome officially in front of the camera our new great selection committee members, Violeta Bava and Javier Martin, who will, I'm sure, take really good care of Tatiana Huezo this afternoon. So without further ado, I'm happy to leave them the floor and to wish them a lovely masterclass.
Merci beaucoup, Emily. Thank you. Gracias. Now we will switch to Spanish then. Few words, unas pocas palabras.
Just a few words briefly before we start with Tatiana. Tatiana Huezo was born in El Salvador, then lived in Mexico, and she is a film director. She is a fundamental reference for Latin American filmmaking. And he was influenced by Echeverria and other filmmakers and has already participated in the festival. She is interested in the violence, in dealing with violence, contemporary violence in her films. And in the final analysis, she has invented her own language. The smallest place, Lugar Más Pequeño, was in 2011 was part of the official selection, and it actually won a prize here at this film festival, Visions du Réel. And then she did a long feature-length film in 2016 called Tempestad and gained international recognition. And she is really mixing her past with fiction. That is really her hallmark. And she comes up with various references in this respect, and we will be able to speak in this context. Thank you. Hi, Tatiana. Good morning to you. No, the sound is not coming through. The sound is not coming. Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, now the sound is there. Hello to each and all of you. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Violeta and Javier, for participating. For me, it's an enormous honor to be here this morning with you so early in Mexico, obviously. And this is one of the festivals that I appreciate the most and on the earth. And I would like to personally thank Emily for her kind words. And yes, that's all I had to say. Thank you very much to you, Tatiana. Now, I'm just trying to talk about your work, your itinerary, your educational background, your training. You've been throughout the world. Your films have been screened throughout the world. And we are going to mention a couple of your short films and then your feature-length films. And we're going to start with your background. When you were trained in the Cinema Training Center in Mexico, the CCC, from which you graduated, and if you went to this filmmaking school thinking that you would become a film director, was that already your viewpoint? And what was your training like, your background like in Mexico at the time? Well, yes, my movie-making background started at the cinema filmmaking school, yes. And then over the years at the school, this there it was a final exam. It's a major competition, and there are about 150 different candidates. And I came from the photography side, and then I I developed different stories at the school, and I believe and that was in 92. It was quite a while ago. And it was very important. My past was very important for me in this school because this is, I get a feeling of that fundamentally this was a very strong experience for me. And this is very important in my personal journey. This was important from a filmmaking side because I did these short length films, and we could say that that really gave this experience, helped me. Also, I worked in photography in the first few years. I was really focusing on photography and not really directing movies. And so this kind of was an overview, and then I became aware of the different facets of filmmaking, the different dimensions. And another important factor in the school was we did various short movies, and what this meant was that we were experienced to filmmaking, and we had to have a rigorous approach to filmmaking. And so then I made my first short length films back at the time. There was Arido, that was one. And that was a 16 millimeter film. And these first experiences with filmmaking materials, and we had to be very careful because we didn't have a lot of film to shoot. So we had to really deal with a makeshift solution sometimes. We really didn't have much film to shoot, for example. So sometimes the problem back at the school was that there were important experiences in my life that really shaped me in terms of filmmaking and my experience at the school. And very quickly, I started to specialize in actually filmmaking. And this is something that I didn't realize. This started after a year at the school. I started getting interested in actually filmmaking. And this was part of, obviously part of the movie industry. And there was someone who brought us up into the mountain, into a forest. And so we could really experience this. And he said, look at the dawn, at the light at this time of day, at this specific time of day. And he called this the magical moment. And this was a transformative experience. We could see how the light transformed the settings, and that left its mark on me. And he would say that, for example, we had to really see things with our heart, and that really left its mark on me. because that was very important to take a deeper look at things and to have really a personal commitment to what I was doing. So that really was part of my experience at the school, and it was a very valid experience. But the photography, yes, I'm very interested in photography, but it was a bit complicated for me, you see, because we were talking about doing shorts at the film, and there was only one female director of photography in the country, and she actually then lived in the States, but there weren't really any in my country. So it was extremely difficult for me to really break through in this profession as a director of photography. And so then, and this really was a profession that was reserved for men. And there was a very kind of a machismo attitude in Mexico, and it's very, very difficult for me to make my way in this profession. So to become a director of photography, this would have been really extremely difficult. And people would say, I mean, if you don't practice this, then you don't really learn how to do it. And so because of this, every year I would tend to focus on other areas. And so there really weren't other directors of photography. And what I realized was that there was a director of photography at the school, and they were working in this field. And so I experienced this for several years, and then we realized that this was extremely complicated to really break through in this field. And we worked with, for example, the electrical staff, and then I managed to really find my place in this area. But no, I didn't manage to break through in this specific sector as a director of photography. And so then I didn't break through here. I didn't make it here. And so then the life and school decided otherwise, and they took a different turning because of this experience. And because of this first work experience that left its mark on me. And then if we look at this background of photography, you were frustrated because of this context. We understand that. And at what point in time, based on your own work, at what point in time did you think, okay, did you start to see yourself as a film director? Well, in reality, I wasn't really thinking about filmmaking. Above all, it wasn't really easy at the school because it was because of its focus. Back at the school, because we had to do different types. We did fiction and so on, and submit projects every year. And then when we had to do a thesis, this lasted about 2 years. We had to do a final work, a thesis project. And sometimes it was perhaps at this point when I was looking at, I did something called the El Ombligo del Mundo, and this this was quite, this was what and yes, you said it was about science fiction. Yes, well, it was in the field of science fiction. It was a science fiction short, but this was kind of, I experimented with light, with different effects of photography and so on, because I was really looking for the kind of image that I wanted to portray at this point in time in my filmmaking career. And I think that it was important to really prepare the screenplay, to work with the actors and prep them, So I was really immersed in this process, and but in reality, I was seeing myself as in the field of photography in the beginning, but then I thought, well, the first time that I said, I want to make films, I want to really tell a story. And then I remembered this was when I was doing these short films, and I really had the possibility to tell the story, tell others' story, to really get into their lives. And not just in terms of documentaries. So this was kind of a transitional period for me when I really looked at this family portrait. So thank you very much for this transition. And because this is, of course, linked to this trip, this short film that you did back at the school. And it was kind of a fiction film. And it was in the almost as a documentary.
Pero soñé con 30 años, ahí tengo uno. 30 años, fíjate, 30 años. Ahí tengo uno. Winnie pero ya ngata.
Ya ngata.
Así no le hace callar ya tamba pero así. Pues como pues na nó mang có số lợi dụng na nó có mà là ít
nhưng mà ai có số này thì chẳng có số này thì
anh tôi nhà có số này chứ mà chẳng có số này thì mà cả anh nó tận để có mang cá bay chứ bây giờ hộ một bây giờ Kada kia ng kama. Ang chest ang kada kia ng chest. Kada kia ng kat.
Bari hút pa ka na. Hút pa ang malay niya.
Tôm cho mong pikat drama tôm sa siya. Asi sa.
Tôm chỗ hàm mong phải tôm chỗ ở trên là mong phải sẽ mãi chậm.
Nên con nó jana, nếu jana thì tôm jana.
Sir, it's coming. Istampan nam yuk tusta. Istampan. Ya tampan banjai.
Well, Tatiana, would you like to, perhaps before you comment on it, and this was filmed, this was shown at the festival, and your films were shown elsewhere as well. But when you, in the case at hand, if you looked at the process, the inception, the idea at the beginning, how did you come up with this idea of building bonds with the characters in your films? How did this come to you? Well, this is really the key to be able to enter the lives of of someone else, to come into their reality. And this is a process where you can really build this bond. In the case of the film, it was something that left its mark on me because it was really difficult to enter the lives of this members of this family, and they were near Veracruz. And this was really a process. The way and the awareness of what you have to do to be able to enter their lives in this way. And I knew that there were families, and it would be interesting to look at them. So it was a film on their lives, the lives of these people. And so there were different phases, and I began to become aware there were young women around men, and so that really caught my attention. And what there was a personal link here for me, something, and I was leaving, getting out of a very complicated relationship with a spouse, and I had been very much in love with this person. And then my companion fell in love with another woman, and then so I was actually going through this own personal grief or bereavement process when I was doing this film. And then someone said, well, I mean, this really focuses on the women, not so much the men. So yes, I realized when I was doing this film actually, I was completely, really full of curiosity to see how this trio would function, these two women and one man, how they could really manage to have this household together. And so this was what you're going through in your life is very important, and this was a very frustrating phase for me. So, well, I spent a year and a half there. I finished the school, and then there were other people in my life, and then I fell in love, and so on and so forth. And then I, I then I started to give thought to making my first film, which was a 37-minute short film. And then I went to this place to really explore the life of these women. I wanted to look into their lives. So that was a process for me. And building this bond is absolutely essential in the filmmaking process. So I started with this family, and I started to look at these women, and I realized that in a great many cases, they, for example, the first spouse got pregnant, and then the other spouse was looking after her. And in a great many cases, the man, the husband, took obliged the woman to be, and the woman was often pregnant and obliged her to stay with him. So there was really also a story of violence, domestic violence, not really, but so this really left a mark on me because my sole idea was really to have a successful love story, real love, and that would happen to me. And that really didn't happen. And these women were competing for men, for their attention, and to get money, and to survive, and so on and so forth. So, and I didn't really want to make a film on domestic violence. That wasn't my point. So I think it's extremely important here to follow your first instincts. That is very important when you're trying to find your way to make a film. And here, the idea was what was going to be in the film, the content, and I wasn't really very certain as to how I was going to get there, what path I was going to find. And when I said that there was a family with three old people, and they were about 70, and they were living together, and they were working together, and these threesome in this, they were all fine and living together happily. So I tracked them down, and I had a friend who took me there and who really accompanied me because they spoke a dialect, and so then he accompanied me, and then they were quite elderly, and they so then he introduced me to them, and he said that I was thinking of telling a story, and I was looking for stories, family stories, and that was really what I was interested in. And I was interested in their specific case, and I really wanted to tell this tale. And finally, these are very imaginative places. So I saw this as a place where I could work, and then I was assisted with this. And starting, well, yes, it's difficult. You start with sometimes very trite things, everyday objects, and you can start with everyday scenes, and then you can, so I spent 2 or 3 hours here, and then when I simply just accompanied them. That was kind of my role in the beginning. And then on the third day, then I started to say to myself, okay, I really have to open my eyes and to really see, otherwise I wouldn't manage.
So I went back to them and they were still looking at me as if I was crazy, especially the women. They were looking at me in a very strange way. And I remember that one of them, the first wife, whose name is Petra, she offered me a tortilla. She asked me if I wanted to eat a tortilla. And I was so excited when she said that. And I said, of course, of course. So she came back with a tortilla with salt that I ate with gusto. And it was amazing because I knew that that tortilla meant the first real contact that I was going to have with them, the real possibility to come into their lives, their universe. And that's what happened. So I decided to stay another week. I came back and they invited me over for dinner. Antonio came for the first time. He was supposed to come that night after he collected some wood and fed the animals. And I was introduced to him and I started to realize how both women bossed him around all the time and they told him what to do. They treated him as a little boy. And I loved how they had the full power over him in that family relationship. It was the matriarchy, absolute matriarchy. So I was working with them and little by little, I started knowing more about their lives. I only stayed for a week and then I told them that I was going to leave and come back with a camera. They'd never seen a camera before. I told them that I would come back with a colleague, photographer, that I would bring some microphones and that I would record their everyday lives. And I asked them for their permission to do that, to be with them every day at every moment. And so I asked them if they could tell me about their love story. And they said, yes, no problem. And that's how I came back a few weeks later and I lived with them 2 weeks. I moved in with them. I needed to be with them so that I could absorb all of these moments of their lives. So they gave me a little corner in their house so that I could stay there with the photographer. We stayed for 2 weeks. And we became part of their family. I felt as part of their family. We had a very beautiful relationship. And that's how the movie was born. But overall, I understood that this documentary, a documentary more than fiction, forces you to look into the realities of other human beings. And I think that that was very important to me, that that helped the investigation process in the making of this movie. That's very interesting what you're saying about how you approach the characters and win over their trust. It's a learning curve. And you find out more and more about their lives, how they live, and this is very interesting. It might seem obvious, but I assume that in your next projects, this became essential, how to approach a character, a subject. And what draws my attention is the subject of family. This is a non-traditional family. So I can tell that in your future projects, we still see this family unity as something that keeps appearing in as a subject of your work. And just think about the ways of how these family bonds are so important. After this work that you carried out, something that consolidated you as a director, a director of documentaries, you went to Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona, which is a university that at that time was a beacon of hope for those working in making documentaries. So how did that happen, and what did it mean to you? Yeah, so after finishing this movie, I was really psyched about continuing and doing this work. And almost by accident, I was in Montador in the house of a friend of mine, and he had a very big library. And that was a big revelation for me, because he had a big collection of movies that we don't have in Mexico. There were different documentaries that were very far away from what I've seen so far in school, or what we had access to in Mexico. Unfortunately, we were very far behind in Mexico. And we have this television tradition, especially at that time. So these very traditional documentaries were unseen and unknown for me. So when I saw this movie, I thought it was fiction. I thought it was a mixture with the great work behind, a mixture of the several techniques, etc. But when I discovered in the credits that in the credits of the movie that it had the participation of some university students from Pompeu Fabra, I got curious and I thought I had to save money, because it was not cheap. It was very expensive to go to this school, Pompeu Fabra. So I was saving for 1 year to go to Barcelona. I worked a lot and I signed up for it. And I sent an idea for a project. This project was incomplete, but it had the intention to understand what happened in El Salvador, in my grandmother's town where she was born. So before I even sent my application to Pompeu Fabra, I already had this idea. And Pompeu required to have a project in order to accept you. So that's how it happened. I managed to get in, and that was a very great step for me. I had access to so many movies that left a mark, with several authors like Diamond de Pardon and several others, masters. Guerin, for example, Joaquim Jordan, Ricardo Vizca. I got to know Naomi Kawase. It was a great door that opened for me. So while I was studying in Pompeu Fabra, I started to develop my next project, which was the tiniest place, or El Lugar Más Pequeño. And I went back to El Salvador. And I started my investigation for this project that was just beginning at that time. Yes, and it's exactly the clip that we are going to show right now. El Lugar Más Pequeño, your first feature length film. So we're going to show this clip that you shot in El Salvador, where people suffered greatly from the civil war. We're going to see clip number 2 now. Thank you.
Ay, Dios mío, dije yo. Son huesos de los compañeros que cayeron aquí. No, si aquí hay de dos. de la guerrilla y de la Fuerza Armada. Y en un costal así, el gran costal, íbamos echando los huesos. Íbamos limpiando todo aquel monte, ¿verdad? Eso fue lo más duro. ¿Va? Solo cabezas de muertos. Y todo, las manitas, todo lo del cuerpo. Y ya de las 9 para allá, ya era solo lamentos en la noche. Todas las noches. Ay, 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 ay. El eco. Fue eco que quedó allí. De tantas almas que murieron allí, ¿verdad? Cuando las estaban matando. Este fue el principio, sí. Esto fue el principio de nuestro pueblo, cuando vinimos nosotros a repoblar, sí.
Si toda la gente matan, yo me voy a ir para el monte, dije yo. Me voy a ir para el monte, aunque haya hoja por comer, decía yo.
El bosque fue como un aliado para nosotros. Fue el refugio, como la cobija que cubrió a toda la gente que anduvo huyendo de los operativos, de las invasiones.
Vamos a esconderlos, a buscar refugio, decían. Corríamos de un lugar a otro. Apúrate, hijo, me decía mi mamá. Siempre detrás de ellos. Y los decían, ya vamos a llegar, pero nunca llegábamos, pues, caminar y caminar para arriba, hasta el cerro, pues. Yo llegué a brincar hasta encima de muertos. Entonces yo sabía que de eso se trataba, de sobrevivir o morir.
Yo me recuerdo donde caían los muertos las de mí. Morirse, matado.
Cuando ese momento yo tenía 14 años, yo solito me fui y decía yo en mi mente, hoy llegó el momento de incorporarme a esa guerrilla, porque quiero ayudarle a mi pueblo, pero más adentro estaba la espina de vengar a mi padre, de que yo vi muerto a mi padre, cómo lo habían matado, tratarlo como un animal. Eran dos cosas que me llevaban, ¿va?
Cuando ya ella me dijo, mire, mamá me dijo, yo ya no voy a estudiarme. No, le dije, yo estudiar, hija, le dije, no, me dijo. Ya me decidí, me dijo. Yo me voy a ir. ¿Y para dónde, hija? Es que, mire, es importante, me dijo. Es que yo voy a trabajar, mamá. ¿Y con quién vas a trabajar, hija? Con la lucha, me dijo. Voy a luchar, me dijo. ¿Y qué es lucha?, le dije. ¿Qué es lucha?, le dije. Esta lucha, me dijo, que vamos a hacer es para que todos vivamos iguales. Y tan joven que estás, hija, le dije yo, y yo te quiero tener aquí en la casa. Ya llegó un compañero y le dijo, Ya platicaste con tu mamá. Mi mamá ya está de acuerdo. ¿Sabe qué? Me dijo, no vaya a llorarme. No vaya a llorar, me dijo, cuando a mí me maten, me dijo. De la muerte somos, me dijo.
Sí, ellos estaban conscientes. Ya estaban niños, pero ya habían madurado bien. Como vivir solo en ese... Esa fue su vida, pues. No tuvieron otra vida más que solo esa.
Uno de los ejercicios más placenteros, vamos, más bonitos de
One of the most
documental es,
pleasurable exercises
si sale bien,
surrounding
toda la
movie making is the
de la geografía de los
representation
lugares, ¿no?
of the
La
geography
construcción de
of
ese
the
espacio
different places and
cinematográfico.
constructing
Es precisamente con
these
este clip
sets for
queríamos
every
entrar
movie. And with
en
this
esta
clip, we
temática y que nos
wanted
contases un
to
poco cómo
dwell into
procedías tú
this
con este
subject.
trabajo.
And could you tell us how you made that happen?
Sí, bueno, pienso que la construcción
I think that
que la construcción del espacio cinematográfico es fundamental para una
building a
película y que
cinematography
el espacio
space
donde
is
vas a
fundamental for
rodar
a
una
movie. The
historia
spaces
y
where
el
you're
espacio
going
que
to
construyes con
film,
tus
it's
personajes
very important. That's
va
where the
más allá del
characters
espacio físico que
belong, and that
donde se
goes
sitúa la
beyond
historia,
a
digamos, ¿no?
physical space where
Esto me sucedió,
the story is
este
situated.
razonamiento que tengo un poco a la distancia, surge también de esta primera
This
exploración
rationale came from
del
my
espacio
own
cinematográfico en esta
investigation of
película,
this
¿no? En
space for this
donde
movie,
el bosque
in which the forest
representa
represents
mucho más que un simple bosque, ¿no? Es
more
la
than a simple
tumba, es
forest.
un bosque sagrado, es la tumba de los muertos,
It's a
es el
tombstone, it's
lugar donde
a
habitan los
cemetery,
fantasmas, donde
is
viven los
where the ghosts
muchachos,
live,
como me decía la gente del pueblo, ¿no?
where the boys play.
Cuando
It's so much
yo
more than a simple
decidí irme a hacer la
forest.
investigación, que
And when
estuve
I
un
started my
mes,
investigation that lasted for a month,
estuve un mes viviendo en este pueblo,
I lived in that
la
town
gente me
for a
decía,
full
sobre
month.
todo la mujer, una de las
People told
protagonistas,
me, especially
la
women,
sirena
one of the
encantadora que le
protagonists,
dicen en la película, me decía,
she said to
si
me,
quieres saber lo que pasó en este pueblo, tienes
if you
que
want to know what
visitar la
happened in this town, you have to walk
y
in
no
the
vayas de
mountains
noche.
and
Ella era
never
una gran
go at
cuentacuentos.
night. She was a great
Pero ella me
storyteller.
decía, no vayas de
And
noche
she said, do not
porque
go
ahí
at night
espantan,
because
espantan
that's where the
y
ghosts come
cuando
out.
cae el sol, se oyen los lamentos
And after the
de
sunset,
las
you can
almas
hear the
caídas en la
crying of the souls.
¿no? Entonces, una de las primeras
So
cosas que hice
one of the
fue
first things
empezar
that I
a
did
caminar en la
was
montaña con un gran
I
esfuerzo
started
porque
to
yo soy
walk in the
pésima
mountains.
deportista
It took me a lot of effort
y
because I'm
hace
not very good at
muchísimo
sports,
calor en este
and
lugar,
it's
40
very
grados de
hot in this town,
temperatura, 80% de humedad.
and the humidity is
Era
very high
tremendo
as well.
caminar
So it was
allí.
really
Conseguía un
difficult to
guía,
walk around in the mountains.
un exguerrillero que conocía la
And
montaña desde la vida
Rene, a
personal.
former
Y
guerrilla
empezamos a caminar.
fighter, went with
Fueron
me,
varias caminatas,
and he
varios
accompanied
días,
me.
largas
We walked
caminatas de
for
por lo menos
several
12
days. We
horas.
took long walks, at least for
Y él
8
hacía un
hours
poco de
in the
guía de
mountains.
turista cuando
And he was my
caminábamos, porque
tourist
íbamos
guide.
pasando por campamentos
We
abandonados
passed
donde
through
había
camps,
trincheras
abandoned
y
camps.
cocinas vietnamitas y me iba
And you had
platicando cómo
some
cocinaban en la guerra y hacían un
so
túnel para que
Vietnamese
uno saliera en otro lado y
inhabitants
el
that
enemigo no
and they
ubicara
would
dónde
teach me
estaba.
things, you know, how
Una
to
serie de
hide
cosas que no
from the
están en la
fighters,
película,
etc. A
pero que
series of
él
things
me
that do
iba
not
poniendo
appear in the
encima,
movie,
¿no?
but
Cómo
that
pasaban
he was
12
telling me
14
all the
horas
time.
adentro de un
So
río,
he
cómo
would tell me
conocieron las
how they
hojas
had
que
to
podían
hide
comer,
for over 12
lo que
hours
significó ese lugar para la
near a
sobrevivencia de la
river, and
guerrilla
how what they would do to survive,
y de las bases civiles, ¿no? Que
and
eran el gran sustento de la
the
guerrilla, ¿no?
civilian
Y el
bases
bosque fue
that
su refugio, como lo
were
dice uno de los personajes en este clip, ¿no?
the sources of
Pero
survival for
a
the
lo que voy
guerrillas.
es
So
que
what I want to
en una
say
de esas
is in one of these walks, these hikes, we sat down to eat something, and Renee was next to me, and we were just taking a break. And I was looking around me. I was looking at the land, the soil, and I saw a piece of metal. So I picked it up, and it was a bullet. It was a bullet, and I was very shocked. I've never touched a bullet before. I've seen them, but I'd never touched it. It was different to feel it in my hands. And I kept it. And I started looking around, and I found another bullet, and another one, and another one. And then I started looking for other bullets on the ground. And then I arrived in a very dark place. And I didn't find any more bullets, but I found a can of sardines, and then another one, and then I found a shoe, and then I found a shirt that was stuck to a tree, and a pair of pants. So I was submerged in this world of trails, of presences, of ghosts. And it was truly a chilling experience. And at the same time, I had the chance to meet the boys, the guys who have told me about before, who I've heard about before, all of these people who were there and left a mark. And I felt that I was finding the path to my movie. And this finding was one of the first footages that I have of the movie. And this emotional bond that I was able to create, to forge, only by walking in the mountains for so many hours, so many days, that created a bond, a very strong bond between me and the land, the place. And that helped me face some of the interviews, and it helped me understand what this forest means for the people of that town. And when I came back with the thousands of notes that I had taken and all the information I gathered, and all this information I gathered around the dimensions of the war, the scars of the war, when I came back with all that, all the information and photographs that I'd taken, because you have to be concentrated and have your camera on you and not miss anything. At least that's the way I work, because it's very important, because it gives you power over others. And in this first encounter, I was not able to do that. So when I came back with all my notes and all the information that I gathered, what happened after a whole analysis and all the information gathered, I talked to the photographer, and I told him, okay, how do we do this? How can we, aesthetically speaking, how can we represent this forest, the forest full of ghosts? And Ernesto Pardo, who's the photographer of this movie, suggested using the forest in an objective way. We need something more subjective, more sensorial. And I would like to film the forest from the point of view of a ghost, how a ghost would see the forest. And in order to do that, we need a steady camera to generate this sensation of a camera suspended. And that's how the idea started to come to me and to represent the space of this forest. I remember that we had very little money, and it was almost impossible to rent the equipment that we needed or have access to an operator, for example. So we borrowed a steady camera. I remember it was really big. It was really heavy, like a Robocop, if you will. It was really big. And I told him, I don't know how you're going to do this, but you have to learn how to use this, because we have to get this point of view from the ghost. How would the ghost see the forest? So he practiced on this camera, and he became really good at it, and the image was working. And so when we started filming and we went to the mountains, it took us days to find all the objects that I found before, you know, the shoes and the shirts and the bullets, etc. We spent days up there. I'm sorry, I'm sidetracking, but it took me 4 years. 4 years after my investigation, it took me 4 years to get the funding to be able to go back and make the movie. And I didn't remember exactly where we had found certain things, so I had to start looking again in the mountains and sweeping the land to find the objects and information I needed. But coming back to the representation of the space, I remember that the first images that Ernesto recorded with the Steadicam in the forest, I used to always check the images, all the footage at night. I had a Spanish colleague who would synchronize the material, the footage, during the day. And then at night, after a long day of work, I would sit down and see all those scenes, all those footage that would be very important for the movie. So I knew that I wouldn't have another opportunity to refilm anything. So whatever I lost, I would lose forever. So I had to be very careful. And sometimes the footage was not very well done. The images were not well done. We were working on a flat surface, but you know, the jungle and the mountains, it's just wild. It's an uneven surface. So he had to go back several times to capture this footage, these images, until he managed to handle this camera very well.
Yes, now you're telling us about Ernesto, because you started to ask about the production issues, for example, the budget, the funding you could get, the limits, and Ernesto's work, which impacted a lot of your own work. And you're within this family, this movie-making family that formed. And I would just like to ask as well, how did you work together with a producer in this respect? Now, with this film, there was a very young, so, and there was a producer from Rome, and we worked together, and he was only 23. And I was working with a Guatemalan producer at the time, and on a different project. So for a personal question, this project didn't work out. So, and the school decided to support this film. And when I saw this, it was very small. He was only 23 years old. The guy that they sent to assist me, this producer, and he had his Rolex, and And I really wondered how we were going to work together in the field. And we were out in the middle of nowhere in the jungle, and you know, I was kind of wondering how we were going to work together. And so we were with these very rural inhabitants, and he really didn't fit in. But I didn't have any choice. So I had to trust him and say, okay, well, let's just go ahead and let's work with the people who are here. So this was the first documentary film that, and really, we became really brothers in war. So it was a very small movie making team. There was somebody from Mexico, and we were really working in this little village, and we had to learn. Sometimes we got lost in the mountain when we were looking for a specific site or something like this. And so the conditions were sometimes quite difficult. And we had to go to a very far remote village, and it took us about 3 hours to get there. And we didn't calculate this properly. And then we ran out of water, and then we had to return. And so we really had, if you're walking 3 hours in terrain that you're not familiar with, and nobody can really help you out. And so this kind of thing, this kind of experience really teaches you that you have to be able to solve these problems that arise, that you can't just say, I'm going to stick to the plan and everything will work out. So this guy is a real strategist in terms of production. He's very good at this. So he had a very limited budget, but so it really was a very, very small budget that we were working in. It was a shoestring budget. So then we worked on this. We were together on this for a long time, but he really adored it. I mean, the people from the village and everything. So this guy really got excited about this and really committed to the projects. So in practical terms, this was extremely difficult. But he really was passionate about movies as well, and you have to respect the director's prerogatives. So sometimes if you're working together with people, and this really forges ties between you, and then the rest of the team as well. We really formed a family, and as we worked together over time, this forged links with them. So now that you've done this, gone through this trial by fire, for making this documentary, the relationship to work started with these interviews. And so you did this in a single place. So you did these interviews, but without a camera, without the image. So, and then we're going to show you the clip from El Silencio, and it's called The Silence.
Debería de haber una pastilla para evitar llorar. Tenía 15 años cuando murió. Mami, me dijo, mataron a la Gladys, me dijo. Y yo sentía que me estaba ahogando. En todo el camino, hasta que llegué a la casa, pude llorar. Mi abuela paterna lloraba, pero escandalosamente, lloraba a gritos. Y entonces ese día soñé que cayó al suelo y me dijo, réceme, mami, me dijo. Un disparo de un avión le cayó y ella se ahogó con su misma sangre. La nena, Víctor, Pablo, Gladys y Toño, ya no los volví a ver. Y siempre en la noche o cuando llueve, ay, digo yo, siempre aquel vacío que llevo que nunca se va a recuperar. Cuando ella me la trajeron, yo ya no la conocía. Le quitaron sus pechos. Tenía una estaca clavada en la parte. No lo soporto, me digo yo. Ya no era mi hija. Ya no se soportaba. Era una sola pelotilla ya, quemada.
Rutilión, Eduardo, Abraham, Remberto, Elfidio, la Yolanda, Mario era el otro.
Eva, Fito, Trine, Lilian, Emita, Germán,
La Zoe, las Flores, la Yolanda Ábalos, la Emma, Aníbal. ¿Cuántos murieron? ¿Cuántos murieron?
Bueno, aquí nos encontramos por un lado con el relato oral, esas voces, esas entrevistas que probablemente tuviste que hacer muchas, mucho tiempo. Y por otro lado, en la imagen vemos a estos personajes en silencio. ¿Cómo llegas a esta idea?
Bueno, esta es una película de voz en off. Era algo con lo que yo quería experimentar, quería alejarme de todo lo que había hecho antes, de lo poco que había hecho antes, en realidad, del documental que había visto, que había aprendido en la escuela, y en fin, era para mí importante
So
experimentar con la voz
for
en off,
me, this was very important.
la voz de los personajes en un primer término.
The voice of these characters is important. So I realized that this technique would be very powerful. So then I actually cut the camera feed and just
en ese
recorded the
sentido,
voices.
hubo todo un dispositivo importante para las entrevistas, ¿no? Yo quería estar sola con los personajes.
So
Buscamos un lugar muy apartado
we
del pueblo,
tried to
encontramos un bosque
work with this
hermoso de
technique and
bambú,
tried to come up with
se
these,
volvió que era como una
let these
cueva,
voices express
se
themselves.
volvió un espacio para
So
este ritual, porque realmente era como un
this was
ritual
kind of our
entrevista, ¿no?
interview ritual that we followed.
Se volvió el confesionario, de alguna manera, el sonido ya
So we
sabía
let these
que para
people really express themselves, talk about what their lives had been like,
Federico, ¿no? Llevaba por lo menos 70 metros de cable,
so
porque yo quería que no
that
estuviera
we had
lejos.
hours and hours of these interviews with just recording the sound.
Y este ritual implicaba eso,
So
era
this
un
interview
encuentro
ritual
cara a cara con el otro,
really paid
eran
off. You
entrevistas
couldn't see their
largas.
faces, but they could really
Ahí durante la
express
entrevista
themselves
aprendí que
better
podían
this way.
ser largas. Realmente la primera entrevista no fue
Because
tan larga. Yo creo que hice por lo menos
some of these
4 entrevistas
interviews
con
really
cada
weren't very
personaje.
long,
Junté más de 30 horas de material.
but I really ended up with about 30 hours of material, of footage from these interviews. And
Tardábamos como
this was a
1
lot
hora
of material,
en
and
romper
sometimes for an hour,
¿cómo decirlo? La formalidad.
It took you an hour to really break the ice and to really get to the heart of what a person had to say and to get to the heart of the matter. And during some of these long interviews, there was this was a bit strange and a bit therapeutic, perhaps. You could, the voice would change tone, and you could feel that these people were really reliving some of this, experiencing it. They, and there was something, there was a very fraternal tone. And when they were being interviewed, and there's another point from a technical perspective, I could control, so to speak, these interviews because I really kept a very close eye on the sound. And so there was someone who was working together with me, and he was working on the computer, getting all of this, recording all of it. So when I did this in school, you'd be multitasking, doing several things at the same time. And this was the same, because we really did a movie with a voice off. And to do this, you with all of these interviews, I had to be able to read through all this material, and it had to be transcribed, and I had to know if there was something in it that I could use. And so that was important. And at that point in time, we saw the rushes, and this was really the only time that a camera was involved. During all of this research, preparatory research, I talked with these people a lot about the first times, the first moments when all of this started. And so the very first things that they said, what they recounted how their children were killed, for example. And I didn't ask the question. They volunteered this information based on their experiences. And so suddenly they would just start talking about this experience. And this was a very strong emotional experience, listening to this and listening to how all of this played out. And for example, how someone's daughter was killed, and then so the inhabitants in the village, they really witnessed this death. And so So I listened to these people, I listened to their stories, and these people were broken, so to speak. So there was a very heavy silence. This is so this really reflected the horror of their experiences, this tragedy. So I really didn't know how to proceed at this point. And this feeling really stayed with me. This, and I know that this loss, the people that have been killed, really have terribly affected them. So in some way, that really marked them. The interpreter can't hear. The interpreter can't hear right now. There is no sound. There's no sound. There's still no sound.
Abordar esta película era una obsesión mía y tenía demasiada información y la elaboración de este
No
primer
sound for the
mapa y de esta
interpretation.
lluvia de ideas me ayudaron a darle un orden, de una progresión dramática al orden de
Still no
la
sound.
información, de los testimonios que yo tenía, y el silencio estaba en el centro, era el corazón, y a partir del silencio decidí construir un poco todo lo demás. Y cuando llegamos al rodaje, mi equipo sabía que
No
este era el
sound.
único momento donde íbamos a poner una cámara frente
Still
a
no
los
sound.
personajes y que no era la entrevista lo que me importaba, porque esta entrevista fue muy corta, fue una entrevista de no más de media hora, en donde, y que fue hacia el final del rodaje, en donde yo les pregunté únicamente sobre la pérdida, sobre sus muertos, sobre los hijos muertos, los hermanos, la familia muerta, ¿no? Y fue hacia el final del rodaje también porque hasta ese momento me atreví un poco a pedir permiso, ¿no? Después de un rodaje que duró 9 semanas y fue tal vez en la semana 9, 8 de rodaje. Yo pedí permiso para entrar ahí al dolor.
So then
Y
we
ellos
could.
tenían la opción de aceptar entrar a ese momento o no.
So at this point,
entonces, bueno, el equipo sabía que la entrevista era
the
importante
team
para
knew.
tener el audio muy preciso y todos los gestos culturales que emanaran de la garganta, de la
So
voz,
what we were
pero
doing
sobre
here,
todo nadie podía cortar,
and nobody
porque
could
había que
really say.
acabar este silencio al final de la entrevista, ¿no? Y esta es la secuencia que acabamos de justamente el
So
silencio de cada uno de los
that
personajes.
was a little bit of our experience with the filming. So now what I want to know is precisely during your research, preparatory research. So from the film that we're seeing, so
que encuentras esta especie de decir, quiero que lo que estoy viviendo yo aquí ahora
so what we were seeing here, based on your experience, and this is
Sí, siento que el reto era poder
so what I could say is
reconstruir, trasladar a la pantalla este momento, esta sensación tan fuerte que yo experimenté, ¿no? Siento que
someone is speaking on the channel saying test, and the voice is really loud.
yo descubrí en la investigación, el reto era encontrar la forma de
So
representarlos.
the whole idea is how you can represent this, how you can show this. So this was a very powerful experience for me, and the idea was how to convey this to the viewers. So we were working on this.
Hablando
And
de lo planeado, por ejemplo, cuando yo conocí a
we
esta
were
mujer,
discussing
a ella
how
no a
we
la
would go
sirena
about
encantadora
this.
que la conocí ahí, acostada
And
en la calle bajo la sombra de
so
un árbol,
we
como
would
aparece en
meet
la
people in the
película, la primera
street
vez
and then
así la
talk to
conocí,
them.
ese lugar donde cada tarde ella se iba a sentar
And,
a
and
hablar
then in
con
the
sus
afternoon,
amigas igual.
we would talk to, they would talk to their
Y
friends and
cuando
so on.
empecé a estar con ella en su casa,
So
ella estaba, su gallina
we
estaba empollando huevos. Y
tried
cuando me contó que
to
eran huevos
work together like this.
ajenos, yo pensé que era
And
mentira, o sea, que eso
so
no era posible, que una gallina empollara
we
huevos de
really
otra
tried
gallina
to
y que de ahí
do what
salieran
we could
polluelos, ¿no?
to work with
Entonces,
this technique.
cuando regresé al rodaje le
And
pedí que por
then
favor se podía poner a empollar a su
when we
gallina.
got back, then we had to
Y
work
me
on this
dijo que su
body
gallina
of
no estaba
footage, everything that
significa
we
que no estaba
had
en celo, que para que la
accumulated,
gallina pudiera empollar tenía que estar en
because
celo. Entonces fue a
then
conseguir la
we
gallina de la vecina y luego fue a comprar huevos frescos a distintas tiendas, la
so
acompañamos, hay una
we
secuencia, sobre eso
really
en la película, y
shared their
puso a la
lives with
gallina,
them.
la obligó
We
a
accompanied them.
empollar.
We walked
Esta es una de las
alongside
líneas
them.
narrativas cotidianas que
And
están en la película y
then
que yo
the
descubrí en
narratives
investigación
came one
y
after
los
the
tonos
other in the
nacieron
film based on these
al
interviews.
final
And then in the
de
final
5 días
analysis,
de incubación, una cosa así, los
I
tonos
think that
nacieron.
we
Descubrí en la investigación que todos los
see
personajes tenían problemas para dormir,
with the research, we were
todos
able
tenían
to
insomnio, todos
dis
tenían una sombra, una cosa, un estrés postraumático que seguía allí
so
de una
there
manera
were some
importante, ¿no?
very strange
Y
things that we
el
discovered as
insomnio y la
we
noche se
worked.
volvió una línea narrativa también, ¿no?
And so there was this
A lo largo de la
narrative
película.
thread
Y también
throughout
surgieron muchas
our
cosas
work.
que yo no había
And the
descubierto
problem was
durante la investigación, como
with
me
the
topé con
research,
una vaca embarazada que estaba
it
cuidando
wasn't really
Armando, que era
an
una
ordinary
generación materna,
situation.
¿no? Y cuando vi que
And
cuidaba a la vaca
so
embarazada y que era casi como su
when,
mujer porque le
for
hablaba y le
example,
acariciaba la
we would
panza y le
work
quitaba las
together
malas
like this,
patas y tal, vi que ahí
and
había una oportunidad también
so this was gave us an opportunity to
de tener
exploit this.
un momento de resurrección, de nacimiento, de algo
So
así. La vaca estaba
we
muy
could really
panzona y yo
see
dije, nos va
what
a
was
tocar
coming into
parto.
being,
Y lo
the
tengo que
artistic
aceptar. Y es
creative
algo que
process.
sucedió allí, ¿no? Y había el operativo vaca.
And
Él tardó muchos días en aprender a usar un radio
we spent a lot
para
of days
avisarnos a través
working
de
on
un
this.
radio que la vaca ya estaba pariendo y su misión
And
fue vigilar a la vaca 24 horas al día.
we, the
Y por
circumstances were
suerte
really
aprendió a usar
extremely,
el radio 2 días antes de que pariera la vaca y traje a 3 veterinarios distintos para
so
que intentaran
there
desviarlo a
were
parir la vaca.
people
Por
working
supuesto que
alongside
ninguno le
us.
atinó y fue un golpe de suerte enorme tener la escena de la vaca en la película, en un momento
So
importante,
at
clave
one
también
point,
hacia
at
el
a
final,
very
porque
key
se habla
moment
de
in the
esto después
film,
del dolor y de todas las
we
pérdidas
could
y
really
todo
feel the
lo que
pain of
significa
the people
volver a
we were
sembrar la vida,
interviewing,
¿no? Porque ellos hicieron eso,
because
volvieron a
what they
sembrar
had
la vida en este
experienced in their
lugar,
lives,
cortaron los árboles que
all of
crecieron en
these
sus casas,
tragic
volvieron
moments,
a sembrar la tierra, a educar a sus hijos, a enseñarles lo que en ese lugar pasó y todo eso yo lo había respirado y lo había asimilado con me parecía de un valor enorme y había también que representarlo y que ponerlo en la película. Otra cosa que sucedió es que vi llover por primera vez allí, por ejemplo, ¿no? Y en la investigación no llovió. Entonces, ya en el rodaje, cuando vi llover la primera tormenta así brutal, se volvió una lluvia de agua y se volvían ríos las calles.
so
Por
then
ejemplo, decidí que ese iba a ser el final de la película.
we
El
were
final surgió ahí durante la
looking at
marcha.
filming what we were
Decidí
seeing,
construir una
and
tormenta que
the
agua que
idea was
golpeara
really this
en
storm. We
formato de
had the
dolor
water running off and all
que
of
había
these,
en este lugar
this
y que de
stormy
alguna forma como
landscape.
espectadores,
And
yo
in
como
a
primera
way,
espectadora, digamos, de la
I
película,
was a
porque yo creo
viewer
que los
as
actores
well,
somos
a
los
viewer
primeros
of
espectadores
what I
de
was
los
seeing
primeros
in
receptores
what I was
este
filming
dolor y esta
here.
alegría.
And all of the colors, for
Y sentía que
example,
había
in
que
this
poner
rainy
agua
landscape.
residual hacia el final de
And
la película y rodamos esta
so
tormenta.
this was
Y
this
así,
whole
el
idea
rostro
based on
de
the
la niña que veo
storm
también
in the
surgió ahí en
film.
el rodaje.
That was very, very important.
Son muy interesantes todos estos hallazgos y
So
realmente cómo
very
se van
interesting to see
encontrando,
these experiences
van encontrando
where
también su lugar en la película y casi su necesidad con esa vuelta a la vida y
you
el
found your
agua.
place in the film, and the water and the elements actually had a place in the film. Now in 2015, you had this short called Ausencia, and then you came back to Mexico, and this was a bit a foreshadowing of your feature-length film afterwards, the Tempestad, La Tempestad. So the idea of what you're looking at here, these different women and their lives, their experience, you want to tell their story. And can you say something about this?
Un poco la premisa y el objetivo
So here, the idea was to see exactly how we could tell this story, to really hear, listen to them, and ask questions, explore what fear means, really the meaning of fear in someone's life, if it's a driving force, and how it takes you over, and how it impacts your life. And so this was kind of the point. So that's here is idea is that we wanted to do a film so that we could really explore this dimension, this perspective. And the protagonist, there were two protagonists. Miriam is, we knew each other well 8 years previously. And then when she came back, when I saw her again, when she came out of prison, she had been out of prison for a year when we finally met again. And she had suffered terribly. She was quite ill from all of the impacts of this. She suffered from PTSD. And she was really very ill because of the experience, her imprisonment and the terrible things, all of this trauma that she had suffered. So together we spoke, and she really talked about her experience, her story. And she was someone who was very much like me.
It was really shocking for me to see her that way. But then we gave her the space to express herself and to tell her story, to tell us what happened while she was in prison. And that's how the movie was born. It was the willingness to tell a story, to give a testimony. I had the feeling that she gave me all this information. She told me her story about her time in prison so that I could do something with it. All the chronicles of what happened to her in prison. And that's how the movie happened. And what struck me the most was that the fear that she faced and what fear can do. Fear is a very strong mechanism. So in order to think about these things, we're going to watch clip number 4, The Bus, and then we will talk about Tempestad a little bit more.
Cuando desperté, me di cuenta que tenía un diente roto. Todavía traía los pedazos del diente en la boca. Era un cuarto totalmente oscuro. Poco a poco empecé a distinguir rostros de mujeres, sus ojos, sus caras. Era un lugar muy pequeño, como de 1,5 metros por 2. El calor era sofocante, sofocante. Y alguien me dijo, ya despertaste. La cosa es aquí, así. La que va llegando le echa aire a las demás. Y yo no entendía. Sí, quítate la playera y abanícanos. ¿Qué? Sí, quítate la playera y abanícanos. Me quité la playera y empecé así. Por horas. Hasta que alguien más llegó. Todas estábamos casi siempre paradas. Hacíamos nuestras necesidades ahí, en el lugar donde estabas parada. Después de 3 días, ellos mismos me sacaron, cargando. Y me llevaron a otra celda. Lo primero que vi fue a una mujer anciana, sin dientes, completamente desnuda, flaca, que me gritó en la cara: "Ya dejen dormir, chingada madre". Comencé a llorar muy fuerte. Alguien se paró a decirme: "No llores, cállate porque vas a hacerlas enojar". No tenía idea dónde estaban todos los demás, las personas con las que llegué. No sabía si mi familia ya sabía dónde estaba. Me quedé dormida. Desperté cuando entra como un carrito que empieza a gritar: "Rancho". Me senté en el suelo mientras veía cómo las demás mujeres se formaban con una taza, un vaso. hasta que regresó esa anciana sin dientes. Se sentó junto a mí y me miró a los ojos. Me dio de su café. Y me dio la mitad de su pan.
Tempestad es una película increíble, es
Tempestad is an incredible
el
movie
cine latinoamericano
that has left a mark on
no
Latin
solo
American
de estos
cinema,
últimos
not
años.
only in the documentary field, but
Estamos viendo que realmente
in
eres una
general.
directora que trabaja
We can
mucho,
see
no
that
solo
you
que
are
trabaja
a
mucho
director that
antes del
works
proceso en todo
very
este
much
momento de investigación,
before
pero que
you even
además
start making the
consigues
movie.
frutos
You do your
concretos
research and
dentro
you
de ese
get
trabajo, de ese proceso
concrete
de
fruit
investigación.
within this
Y en el
process of
caso de
investigation.
Tempestad,
And in the case of
hay este
Tempestad,
viaje que tienes que
we
hacer
see this
para
journey
investigar
that you
hacia
have
hacia
to
el Golfo de
do to
México, territorios
investigate in
difíciles
the
de
Gulf of
narcos, los Zetas,
Mexico. It's a very
cártel del
difficult
Golfo,
territory with
y de ese
narcos,
viaje
and
va a
in
surgir
that journey,
esa atmósfera, esa estética, esa
you get
lluvia,
all
ese
the
cielo azul, ¿no?
aesthetics
Que es
and
un poco
all this
el
blue sky
paisaje
that you
interno, ¿no?
mentioned,
de los
which is
personajes.
the landscape of the main characters.
Sí, por cierto, la última imagen es Miriam.
Yes, the
Es
last
la única
image is
imagen que
Miriam.
hay de
Is the
ella en
only
toda la
image, the
película.
only footage that we
Ella
have of
me
Miriam in the
acompañó
entire
en muchos
movie.
momentos
She was with me
del rodaje.
in
También
many
Adela.
moments during the shooting of the movie,
Porque
and
además
Adela as well.
realmente no filmo primero las entrevistas y luego a
And
partir de
I
ellas
don't
voy
like
a
to
conseguir la imagen.
film the
Son
interviews.
dos cosas que van sucediendo.
This happens in a parallel way and at the same
Pero
time.
bueno, sobre lo que dices del viaje, sí,
But regarding this
viaje
journey that
sí,
you
porque es
mentioned,
un poco
this
¿cómo
journey
decirlo?
is
La columna vertebral de la película.
the
Es un viaje que
spinal
cruza
cord
México
of
del
the
norte al
movie, is
sur.
the core of the
Es
movie.
un viaje bastante
It's
subjetivo
a
porque es
journey
un
from
poco mi
north to
propio
south,
viaje,
and it's my
buscando
own journey,
los pasos de Miriam en este retorno a casa después de
following the
haber salido
footsteps
de la
of Miriam
cárcel.
after she left
Y
prison.
es una decisión
It was a decision I made,
que yo
an
tomo muy
aesthetic
temprano,
decision that I
muy pronto,
made very early on,
porque yo tenía la posibilidad de rodarla en
because
nuestra
I
casa,
had the
pero
opportunity
el
to
testimonio
film
era
her
tan
in her home,
poderoso,
but
era tan enorme el daño que le habían hecho y
the
era
damage that she had suffered was so
la sensación mía de
immense
que
that
esto me
I had
podía
the feeling
suceder a
that I
mí
had to
o que
protect
le
her,
podía
because
suceder
that
a
could
cualquier
happen to me, or
persona
it could
en
happen to
México que esté
anybody.
una pagadora, ¿no?
Anybody could be a
A cualquier
pagadora or a
persona
payer.
normal
So
en México le
this could
podía
happen to
suceder,
anybody in
así como la
Mexico.
otra historia, la de Adela.
And
Hay miles de
just like
madres
the other
buscando sus
story,
hijos
there's
desaparecidos en
so
México,
many mothers looking for
miles
their
de
disappeared
familias,
children,
realmente
many
la
families.
dimensión de la tragedia es
The
enorme.
dimensions of this tragedy is
En este
huge.
momento y en los últimos años
And right
la
now,
cantidad de desaparecidos.
we can't even count the amount of
Y quería
disappeared
que fuera
persons in
algo
Mexico. So I wanted this to
que
be,
tuviera, que abarcara esa dimensión. Entonces no me
I
funcionaba
wanted this
encerrarme en
to
cuatro paredes con
reach
Miriam,
all these
¿no?
dimensions.
Y mi punto de partida para arrancar la
So my starting
investigación
point
visual y
for the
estética es
investigation,
hacer este
visually and
recorrido de
aesthetically, was to take this journey.
fui a Matamoros,
So I went to
poco a costa de mi
Matamoros,
propio miedo, que también
despite my fear. I was very afraid to go there,
fue una
but I
experiencia que
did,
también
and
premió
it
un
was a
poco a la
great
película,
experience
¿no?
that
Irse a Matamoros a
helped me make the
investigar y a
movie.
recorrer la ciudad y
Being there in
ver lugares
Matamoros, walking around the
abandonados y
city, I
andar por
wanted
la
to visit
carretera.
some abandoned places
Esto fue tal vez en
and drive
2014 y
down the
estaba
road, and
peligroso,
it was
había
really
toque de
dangerous
queda en
back then.
Matamoros. Y en fin, yo tuve que de alguna forma vender
We
mi
had a curfew, I
pensamiento
remember,
para
in Matamoros, and
moverme y para
it
iniciar
was dangerous,
este
but I
recorrido que
wanted
fue
to do it to
importante.
start my journey that was so important
Y
for
comenzó este
making the movie.
viaje mío, ¿no? También como siempre con mi
This was my
cuaderno de notas
journey.
y mi cámara de
I
fotografía.
had my notebook with me, and
Este viaje lo hice con el fotógrafo
I traveled with the photographer,
fueron muchos hallazgos. Fue muy
and we found so many
importante
different things.
encontrar lo que habitaba la carretera, ¿no?
We
Para mi
found
primer
several
sorpresa,
elements on the road.
estaba lleno de
To my
figuras
surprise,
militares, de cosas
we saw military figures, we saw military checkpoints.
Que se volvieron esta presencia de fuerzas de seguridad.
This presence of military and police forces were everywhere and was everywhere. And I was stopping at different hotels, different cities in Veracruz and in other places. I would stop in markets, for example, trying to look for that life in prison that she talked about, which was vital for the story. So I made a stop in all of these places that could help me understand what happened during that year that she spent in prison. And what I saw the most, funny enough, was the storms, the rainstorms. I saw so many rainstorms. It was rainy season, so I saw several floodings, the water hitting the glasses, the windows. I remember the storms mostly. So that became the atmosphere of the movie. And we always said this is a blue movie. It's a humid movie. And this humidity is part of her. It's part of this emotional landscape. And that's how the whole aesthetics of the movie came about. Tatiana, this movie is linked to this journey from north to south, but there's also a mise-en-scène idea, how to respect the staging of the movie. How do you manage to get to elaborate the characters, to get to the characters of the movie?
Sí, por ejemplo, el autobús que está lleno es un recorrido no solo de paisajes a lo largo del camino, sino también de rostros diferentes.
The bus, for example, the bus gives you the opportunity to see so many different faces. That was one of the main findings for me, the bus. So I wanted to show this landscape with the faces of Mexico in an attempt to say this bus is a country. And everything that happened to Miriam and Adela could happen to anybody in Mexico. This is Mexico. So we wanted to transmit that to the viewer. And that's why I decided not to show her face. So I decided to link her voice to the story, because this could have happened to anybody. And in order to capture those faces, you need a strategy. And during my investigation, I was taking different short videos, and I was filming the passengers of the bus. Of course, I had to ask them for permission. And that created a great collection of faces. When I asked people whether I could film them or not, they would look at me weird and they would feel uncomfortable. They would get really uncomfortable with it. So it was not easy, but I wanted to capture the faces in their different stages, you know, on a relaxed stage while they were riding the bus. This journey was so important for me. Seeing the changes in their facial expressions. It's what happens to you when you take a bus ride or you travel by bus. So I had to use that as an element in my film. Sometimes I didn't ask for permission. I just kept on filming. I took several buses, many buses, and we got some extras. We would ask people if they would accept to be an extra in the film in exchange for a little bit of money. And the only thing I needed from them was to travel. I told them, you don't need to look at the camera, you just need to relax. And they were the best extras. And the idea was not to film long journeys, but at least a couple of hours so that we could capture the different stages. So we had 5 people, just normal people. In every city, we did the same. We asked them to be extras in the movie. And the camera was really small. We were working with a very, very small 4K high definition camera. And we were not recording the sound, just the image. We were interested in other things, the wind that would come through the windows or that sort of thing. And people would look at us, but nobody said anything. Nobody complained, so we just kept on going. They accepted that we were there. And so we were filming landscapes. And after an hour, they forgot all about us, and people would start to fall asleep on the bus. And once they fell asleep, we started filming them as well. So that's how I was able to capture these faces and bodies that appear all along the film. Another element that was important was to capture the best faces that I found. So I had somebody in charge of that. Somebody had to go to that person and explain to them what we were doing, that we were filming, and they had to sign a waiver to allow us to film them. Sometimes they said no, sometimes they said okay. But during the filming, we lived several good experiences. That's very interesting how you can approach people like that and involve the passengers of the bus and treat them as extras in your movie. Regarding the staging, I would like to show the military checkpoint, and that is clip number 5.
¿Dónde va, jefe? La Victoria nada más. Ahí, queda una más. Para terminar. Para terminar el autobús. Hay que mandar bien, dos elementos. Además, son las medidas pertinentes.
¿Esa maleta suya? Sí. ¿De dónde viene? De aquí de Matamoros. ¿A qué se dedica?
Soy transportista.
¿En dónde trabaja?
En la compañía de Roger.
¿La identificación?
Sí.
¿Y a dónde se dirige?
Al puerto de Tampico a recoger un camión.
¿Y el trabajo?
Sí.
¿Qué dirección tiene?
Esa es dirección de... Aquí en zona centro, aquí en Matamoros.
¿Pero por qué trae dirección de Silao, Guanajuato?
Lo que pasa es que no me han dado la credencial nueva.
¿Y aquí dónde vivías antes?
¿Aquí?
¿En esta dirección?
Sí.
¿Es necesario que cambies tu identificación ya?
Claro que sí.
¿Es suyo? ¿Es la revisión? ¿Es la revisión?
Sí.
¿A qué se dedica, señor?
Estudio.
¿Dónde estudió?
Estoy estudiando prepa en el 135.
¿Hacia dónde va?
Hacia Tampico, Madero.
¿Motivo de su viaje?
A visitar a mi papá.
¿Allá vive su papá?
Sí.
¿Qué dirección tiene su papá?
Tiene calle Rin en el hospital, atrás de sobre la pared de Rey.
¿Ya le revisaron su maleta?
Ya se lo checó el compañero.
¿Motivo de su viaje?
Cuestión de trabajo.
¿En qué trabaja?
Electricista.
¿Va con alguna compañía o con su cuenta?
Compañía.
¿Cuánto tiempo va a durar el tapiz?
Una semana.
¿Me manda cada mano en la bolsa? Sí, señor. ¿Su dirección actual?
Sí, sí.
Bueno, nos encontramos con este retén militar y nos preguntamos si
So we are at this
cómo lo
military
encontraste y
checkpoint,
cómo
and we
accediste,
wonder how
cómo
did
se
you
organiza esa
access
puesta en escena.
this staging?
Sí, para mí era muy importante que hubiera estos
Yeah, for me, it
retenes
was very
militares, por lo menos en el
important
norte,
to
que están a
show
lo
the
largo y
military
ancho de toda la
checkpoints
carretera
because
del
they are,
Golfo
you can find them all along the
Y
roads in the
tramitamos
Gulf of
durante muchos
Mexico.
meses con Nicolás
We were doing a lot of
permiso con
paperwork
la
for a long
Serena
time,
para poder
asking
rodar
for some
convoys
permission
militares y estos retenes.
to
Nos
film
investigaron
these
a todos
military
desde
checkpoints, and we were
fue
thoroughly
muy complicado
investigated by the
y
police.
finalmente la resolución fue
And
negativa y de hecho
finally,
nos
they said
prohibieron
no, and
rodar
they
aquí
did
en
not
el
allow
retén.
us to do it.
Y bueno, yo no quería
And
quedarme
so
sin esta
I
sensación
didn't
que
want
yo había
to,
vivido, yo había pasado por estos retenes en el
I didn't want to
norte,
miss out on the
donde te abren
opportunity
la
of,
maleta y te
showing
sacan hasta
to the
los
viewers
calcetines de la maleta
what
y
happens in a
revisan
checkpoint where
esta
they open
entrevista
up your
muy, muy
suitcase and
dura.
they take even your socks out of the
Y
suitcase
esta
and they
sensación de que te
check your
tratan
personal
como un
items and this
delincuente, ¿no? En los
feeling that you're
retenes.
being treated as a criminal.
Y bueno, entonces, pues, siento que cada película tiene
So
las
I feel that
necesidades
every
que tiene para
movie
poder tú construir lo que estás
has different
buscando
needs,
y eso
different
dicta de alguna
elements,
forma los
and
dispositivos
that dictates
que tienes que echar a andar, ¿no? Para conseguirlo.
what
Entonces,
you
bueno,
need to
yo
do
les
to
dije a la
achieve it.
gente de producción, les
So
dije, tienen que conseguir
I told the
a cinco
production team,
militares
look, you need to get
reales.
5 military
No
men,
sé
real
cómo, pero
ones.
que
I don't know
consíganlos,
how,
¿no?
but you need
Creo
to
que
get
pusieron
them,
un anuncio
5.
en el diario
I
que
think
decía
they posted an ad on the newspaper or
buscando a
something,
militares
and they
retirados
started
o
looking
recién
for
retirados que
retired
supieran de
military
armas
men.
o algo así, era un requisito que
I
pusieron
think it was the requirement. I can't remember right now,
y
but
consiguieron un retén que estaba
so
abandonado,
they
un
found
retén de
an
migración,
abandoned checkpoint, a
la fabulosa
migration checkpoint.
frontera con Brunswick en Estados
So
Unidos está lleno
that's
también de,
how
hay retenes de migración. Entonces había un retén de migración en
that's
donde
how we
estaban
managed to
sin
do
ningún
it, with
problema.
retired military men and an abandoned checkpoint.
Y bueno, yo conocí a
I
estos militares el
met
día,
this
esa
military
mañana,
man
esta
that
escena,
same morning
muy
when
formales,
we
me los
filmed that scene.
presentaron.
They were very formal, very serious.
No podían, cuando los consiguieron y los entrevistaron, me dijeron
When
que
we
no podían
interviewed
usar
them,
su uniforme militar, por
they
ejemplo,
told us
que
that
era
they
algo
could
que
not
estaba
use
prohibido.
their military uniform
Y
because that was
trajimos
forbidden.
uniformes
So we
militares
brought them a uniform to
desde la
wear.
Ciudad de México,
We brought them
de
from
sus
Mexico
tallas,
City
para que los pudieran
so
usar,
that they
¿no?
could wear them.
Y bueno, esa mañana, como les digo, hablé
And
con
that
ellos,
morning, when
me
I
dijeron
talked to
sus
them,
rangos,
they
había
told
uno
me
que evidentemente
that they
era el
had
jefe
different
que tomó el control, que es el que
positions in the
entrevista,
military, but they were all
y yo lo
retired by
único que
then.
les pedí
And the only thing that I asked them
que
was
hicieran su trabajo como lo
to
habían
do their
hecho en los
job,
retenes, ¿no?
the same way they used to do it when they worked
Que me
at
ayudaran a
those
montar ese
checkpoints.
retén.
I asked them to help
Montaron
me
estas
recreate the work they
y
used to do.
rápidamente se
So
organizaron,
they
tenían
quickly
sus
got
propias claves,
organized,
su
they knew
propio
exactly
lenguaje,
what to do, they
rápidamente
had their
montaron el retén, se pusieron cada quien
their
su posición
own
y
vocabulary,
me
their
pidieron
own
que de ninguna manera
terminology.
podía rodar
And they
sus
asked me
fotos. Entonces la cámara se puso atrás.
to keep the camera from behind because we were not allowed to film their faces. But they had to do something very simple. Sound was extremely important. That's why the microphones were very close to them so that we could capture the conversations between the passengers and the military men. And then the passengers of the bus where we were, they had no idea that we were going to stop. So there's the military man that stops the bus. Well, the passengers get off the bus. They form a line. People who live in the north, they know exactly what to do when they encounter a checkpoint. They know that you have to take your suitcase down because they're going to be checked. So the procedure was completely choreographed, if you will. And that's how we built this sequence. And they were just doing what they were doing for years. There is a huge military base in the north, one of the most amazing checkpoints that I've ever seen. And it's something ordinary to them. And even then, the passengers were, you could feel the vulnerability, you could feel the fear of the passengers when they start being questioned. Where are you going, and where do you live, and what's your name, etc. And you can feel that. Yes, you were talking about the importance of the sound in this staging at the military checkpoint, and we wanted to move on to the next subject, which is an essential element in your work, which is the sound, whether it be during the process of writing the screenplay, during the interviews, post-production, and film scoring. And for that, we're going to move on to the next clip. Sounds of War, or Sonidos de la Guerra.
El lugar más pequeño.
And then we'll talk about The Tiniest Place, your other film. Thank you.
Nadie estábamos conscientes de lo que venía. Nadie, porque nadie pensábamos en una guerra, ni nadie los imaginamos semejante cosa.
Nos amparon una invasión que andaban 14 aviones. Yo ya sentía que me caían los balazos. Iba yo con todos mis hijos y la Toña.
La fama que teníamos los de Cinquera es ser subversivos. Sí, comunistas. Por eso es que soltaron las flotillas de aviones, los batallones y todo, y mataron a la mayoría.
Venían a matar, pues, porque cuando esas bombas las tiraban, uno sentía que aquello ya le iba a caer encima a uno. En el cuerpo, pánico. Uno sentía que el corazón se le salía.
El corazón, pum, pum, pum. Palpita, que ya le llega la hora a uno.
Y Cinquera desapareció como pueblo. Bomba tras bomba, invasiones, quedó arrasado. Cualquiera que hubiera pasado no podía imaginarse que aquí había sido un pueblo.
So now we were talking about this interview ritual, fine. Now, when you choose, you have this very rigorous choice. You decided not to film the images, to stay with the sound. And how does this work out? I mean, what do you do with the images then? How can you work without images? So I work with a very small producer. So I have this sound, and you can really do a lot with sound. So yeah, sometimes I keep the images, but the idea is I really safeguard these images. And these people are in danger. So this is why I made a choice not to show the images. I knew that if I really used a camera and showed their faces, then this could create problems. So this is kind of a rigorous exercise. If you just focus on the voice, then, well, you don't really need the image. You don't need pictures to go with the voice. And so you can really, so for me, the image here was really not necessary. So the idea was to explore the dimension of the voice and to work on the voice and with all of the sounds that emanate from the voice. This means that you're able, because when I looked at the footage and we were in the post-production phase, then we had all of this footage in a huge quantity, and we had to transcribe all of this on paper, on hard copies. And so we did this very quickly so that when we had some time, then I started taking notes on this. And for me, for example, there were pages and pages and pages of transcripts. It was like a novella, and I had to read through this. There was a lot of material here, and it takes a lot of time to read through it. And sometimes you have to check up on things and confirm things that you wanted to check. So, and I just, I used different color coding, and I'd highlight things using different colors. And the idea is really to get rid of what wasn't necessary. And I used this different color coding, and then I constructed a timeline with these voices. And so, the way people use their voice, the way they speak, and there are silences, pauses, when people get to really key moments in their narrative. And there are silences once they've really recounted these tragic experiences. And sometimes this time and the rhythm of the voice, this is also very important. The voice changes pace, the delivery changes. And with the different voice sequences, and then when we had to edit this, and I had a team working on me and assisting me with it, there was a lady called Paulina, and who was the first film editor in the post-production phase. And so then this all merged together. And so what did you enjoy the most in all of this editing process? What did you really like the most? Well, precisely how you can construct this emotional narrative through the voice, through the dimension of the voice, because a lot of times you can see something that I didn't get to write down, but really to convey the emotion, and the way people breathe, and for example, a sob or something like this. And you're so close to the characters that you can really convey this with the voice. So the voice, having explored the dimension of the voice, I realized that the voice conveys a lot. It's a very powerful narrative tool. And so the voice really expresses a huge range of emotions, and all of it, people don't realize how much is contained in the voice. And so we worked on this, on the voices, and then in the post-production phase, there was an incredible Cuban lady who helped us with this. For example, for the smallest place, we worked on the sounds of war. And this was an important moment in the film, and it's full of all of these different sounds. And so that was really very, very important. So we really recorded all of these different incidents, and so these were all different kinds of sounds. So yes, this was a very exciting phase for me. And so there were all of these different sounds, and I thought, oh, this is fascinating. So, I mean, we really don't even have room for all of these sounds. So when people, so we have on all these different levels, all these different sounds. This was really incredible. What people you can do. I mean, the power that this gives you with the sound. When you construct your film, you put it together. So this is something that is really that you can do with a documentary, and you're dealing with one aspect. You're taking a very rigorous approach to this. So I think, yes, a journey. And so I spent several months, maybe 3 months, working on just this one aspect. And this was one of the things that really I enjoyed the most throughout the filmmaking process for this film, the different sounds, how you work with them. And so, for example, the sound of war. So you have different sounds trying to reflect the violence that's going on. And we need to look for something that's less illustrative, maybe something that is a bit more suggestive, a bit more abstract and less concrete. And so then I remembered, we were looking and suddenly remembered that, yes, there was something that we could use. There were some trees and the sound of like a branch bending in with the wind, and this is really like a person's cry. I mean, the sound of these branches bending under very heavy winds. So this was kind of a sound of war for me. And so that was also an important point. And the different sounds that we were hearing. For example, at one point there was actually a cave, and people were, and this in the night people couldn't sleep, and we really, all of that was on the footage. We recorded all of this, the different and the idea is then when you put the soundtrack together and see how you can match the soundtrack to what you're seeing on the screen. And so that's a really important moment. And so the idea is that always to take a subjective approach to putting this together in the soundtrack and everything, so that you're trying to magnify the feelings So this is a really strong process. And in terms of the sound, what you're working together. So this, in terms of the voice, you speak of the importance of the voice and what the voice can convey. And you said that in documentary films, you really don't like music, but that you did include this music in your films. So this is kind of the problem. And how did you get around to including this music in your films? Yes, I always have a clash with the music. And there are films that don't have music at all. And sometimes films don't need it to really manipulate people's feelings, the feelings of the person watching it. And so for a long time, I've been working on the music, and this is a very rich theme. The whole idea of, well, music is a very broad topic, of course. And I always start off saying, we're going to get music that's very atmospheric. For example, in the smallest place, I don't know what we could get something that situates us in the forest or something like this that really creates a certain atmosphere. So then we worked with very environmental aspects, a very subtle soundtrack, and then suddenly in the editing process, for example, the rain. And you would get the rain in the smallest place. And something that really led me to clean up the rain, so to speak. So because I wanted to take a different approach. So yes, this really is driven by the emotions that you want to convey. And it's very difficult to not illustrate in the Tempestad, in this idea of darkness, the idea of hearing everything that you can, and really reinforcing the drama that you're experiencing. And you have these very dramatic moments, and then a silence, and then you have the voice and the surrounding sounds. And music here, in this respect, in a certain way, is a prolongation of the person's emotions. It's an extension of their emotions, what they're feeling, for example, in a painful moment. And so I tried to do it without music, but it really wasn't possible, because I feel that the music can help. And I hate it when people say, oh, you have to put this kind of music in a film. So I really try to sometimes work without it. And this does add a certain coherency, organic coherency to a film when you include music. So, for example, using certain instruments, and you could use, for instance, local music included in the film to really underscore the atmosphere. And here, with a person who taught piano and so on and so forth, and he gave me a hand with the soundtrack and La Tempestad, and this was a real help. So he really put together some music for this, and the idea was the mother who had lost her son, and there was this huge long silence, and because someone had lost something. And so the problem was finding music that really matched the moment that we were seeing on the screen. So this was difficult. We did about 15 different mock-ups, and nothing really worked here. So this is what's really great with music. And sometimes it's hard to find the right match. And music for films, Yeah, well, that's really difficult. Sometimes you really have to clean them up and get rid of some of the music because you get all the different styles of music that you can see, and you can think, okay, let's get rid of this. Let's ditch this. But this is a way of communicating because you have the picture and then you have the music that goes along with it. So this is a very rich process of interchange. So when you don't, when we met, and this guy told me that there has to have a very specific feeling, and I get the idea that that's important. You have to feel this, and so the music for the film really reflects this. And this was really specially put together for these scenes. And so that's this really was a very profoundly emotional experience for me when I heard the music that he had put together for it. And so the music that he put together for the film was really very appropriate. Now, if we look at your work, we could evoke, yeah, when you were at the CCC, the cinematographic school, and you looked at fiction, and finally you moved into documentaries. And then now you're going to do Noche de Fuego, Night of Fire, which is your first fiction film. So what happened here? How did you do the crossover from documentary to fiction? Because that's a big leap. How did you get there? How did this process work out? How did it play out? Well, it's I had always wanted to do fiction movies, fiction films. I'd always wanted to work in this field, not just documentaries, but so one thing led to another, but I'd never lost sight of this, but of this idea of making fiction films. So there was a long gestation process for the film, and I was really full of the emotions that had been created by La Tempestad, and I really needed to kind of clean myself up to get rid of some of this darkness. So then I did a film about childhood and adolescence. So this fiction film, well, Nicola knew that I was interested in this world of childhood and characters, and they go to school and kids and so on and so forth. And so there was a novella written by an American lady, and he said, well, read the book and see what you think. So I read the book, and it was okay, interesting, and I liked it. And there were things that I didn't agree with her viewpoint, but still. But I read the book, and I really liked. I fell in love with some of the characters. And what I really said to myself, yeah, I really have to do this. And then I did my research. And so then I wanted to write the screenplay for the film and wanted to say what I needed. What would I need to really do this and film all of these people, all of these kids? So this was a real opportunity, and I wanted to seize this opportunity. So, and because of this, I came back to the book and tried to see how I could work this into a movie. And so then I sent this off to the author and to get her feedback, and I said that maybe this didn't really meet her expectations, because perhaps she had a different, there are certain things that you can
por
do
eso la
in a
directora
movie that you can't do in a novel and
adecuada,
vice versa. And I
una
didn't know if
directora
this
con más
was,
experiencia y que esté
maybe she
más,
wanted a
que sea
filmmaker
un
with
poco
more
más
experience
comercial o menos,
and
menos
who would take a
rara, no
more
sé.
commercial approach and not quite as strange
Porque
an
además
approach.
yo solo voy
So,
a poder escribir un poco a partir de mi propia infancia,
and
de mi hija, de cómo
and
yo
I
veo esta
wanted to really
historia,
base this
los
on
escritores la
childhood and how I
construí.
saw the story.
Yo no estaba segura de
S-
meterme en este
So
lío
I
enorme, me
really
metí.
didn't
Y
know
bueno,
how
y
to
él y
deal with
James
this.
Stark, que son los dos productores
And so
ejecutivos,
then
digamos,
I
me
contacted
dijeron,
the
mira, haz lo que
producers,
quieras,
and
aproxímate al libro como quieras,
so
sé
they
donde
said, really,
quieras, haz
you
lo
feel
tuyo,
free to make the film that you
pon tu
want to
vida,
make.
haz lo que tengas
Look,
que hacer, termina el
you do what
guión
you have to do. You
y
finish the
vamos a hacer
screenplay,
esta
and
película
then
juntos.
we'll really start doing this film
Y toma
together.
el tiempo que necesitas. Sí.
Si te
And
parece, vamos a ver el
so
pequeño clip
now let's see the
de
little
Noche de
clip
Fuego.
from Noche de Fuego, Night of Fire.
Bueno.
Well, oof.
Bueno, el primer desafío, imagino,
Now, here I
una vez que te embarcaste en
imagine
esta
that when
aventura
you
de la
launched
ficción,
out on this
debe
fiction,
haber sido
making a
también
fiction film,
trabajar con
that
un equipo
you
más grande y
work
dirigir
together with a
actores
larger
que
crew,
respondiesen a un guión ya más
and
concretamente armado, un
that
guión
you had a different
programático y
approach
etcétera.
and a
¿Podrías
different
contarnos cómo fue ese
dramatical
pesante
approach.
y esta experiencia
Can
sobre
you
el
kind of
trabajo?
talk about this transition, this leap from
Sí,
documentary
fue
to
un reto
fiction?
muy grande, muy grande.
Well, it was a huge challenge, I agree.
Realmente había que crearlo
So
todo.
the idea was
A
really,
diferencia del documental,
everything
¿no? O sea, los
changed when you moved
personajes,
from
los
the
hechos
world
son
of
los que transitan,
documentary
los espacios que
and
habitan. Y
what you're
aquí había que
chronicling and
crearlo
so on,
todo.
and then you move to a very different
Bueno,
universe.
uno de los retos fue trabajar con un
So
crew
the
gigantesco
the
de
challenge
alrededor de
was to
100
work together with a
personas.
much
Como
bigger
ven, pues
crew,
hay
very
balazos,
different people,
no se ve en el clip, pero hay
and it
tormentas,
doesn't really
hay
show
ráfagas de
in the clip.
viento,
There were
y
various
había que crear todo,
problems,
la lluvia, el
and
peligro,
you
los
had the rain, the
jardines,
wind, and
el
all of
maquillaje, el
this,
casting
and then you
tenía
have the
grados muy,
makeup
muy
and
altos de
all of this.
dificultad porque
It's
son
really a
niñas,
very,
amigas,
very different approach because these are
amigas y
girls that are
hermanas
friends,
a los
and
8 años y
they're
después a
about
los
8 years
14
old,
años, 5
and
años
from
después,
between 8 and 14
que
years
había
of
que
age.
encontrar a
So
los clones de estos 3
then
pequeños, o sea, son 6
you
protagonistas
have to work together with them,
y tenían que ser muy parecidas. Y
and
este ya
sometimes
fue un lío
this is
tremendo, o
really
sea,
quite
paso del tiempo
difficult,
y encontrar a estas
and
actrices
so you're working with these
yo
young
quería ser mejor
actresses,
actrices. Eso
and
era algo muy importante para
this
mí
was
y a lo que nos
something
embarcamos, que yo
that
creo que es
was a
una de
little
las
bit
cosas más caras de la
hard for
película y
me,
más complicadas
and
fue
this
el
was certainly
casting.
more complicated
Yo
than a
quería,
documentary
es
film
decir, la
approach.
película está enmarcada en un ámbito
So
rural,
the
en
film is
una
set in a
montaña
rural
donde
setting,
se siembra amapola
and
y hay un contexto violento que rodea a
there
estas pequeñas y ellas de alguna
in
forma
poppy fields and poppy
descubrieron lo
growing.
que implica ser niñas, ¿no? En un
So then
contexto así, ¿no?
they
Digamos que ese es el
realize
trasfondo
what's
de la
going
película.
on, and
Y bueno, yo necesitaba niñas
so
campesinas, a
I
niñas del ámbito
needed
rural,
really
porque las iba a
rural
hacer
children,
irse al río,
farmers'
colgarse de
children,
los árboles, andar
young
entre las
kids from the
vacas,
fields, and
que tuvieran un vínculo con la
so
tierra, que
that they
supieran lo que
really had a
significa
bond
sembrar,
with the earth,
la
that
forma de dirigirse a sus... es
that
decir, son muy, muy diferentes los niños de la
this
ciudad a
was
los
very
pequeños.
different from what
Y
I had done
entonces empezó
before
esta
in the
búsqueda que duró
documentary
un año.
films.
Duró
And
casi un año la búsqueda de las 6
so it
actrices.
took me about a year to
Hicimos un
find
casting
these 6 actresses who
en
then
distintos lugares de
starred in the
México,
film,
en Oaxaca,
and
en
different places of
Querétaro, en
Mexico, in
Puebla,
Oaxaca, in
en
Puebla,
distintos lugares de
in
México,
various parts of the
en las
country,
montañas, en la sierra,
and
¿no?
in the
O sea,
mountains,
tuve una
in the
compañera que me
fields.
acompañó en este
And I had
proceso
a
que es
friend who
fundamental,
really helped me
Graciela,
with
que
this,
fue mi
played a
soldado
Graciela, who
a lo
played
largo de todo este proceso y ella me
real
ayudó a
role.
encontrarlas. Fuimos
And
más de
she
800 niñas,
helped me a lot finding
alrededor de
these
800 niñas
kids.
fueron de donde salieron las 6 protagonistas.
And then this meant that these were adolescent girls, some of them, and they had to hide when some of the men came. And one of them was actually from the circus world. And so she also starred in the film. So really, these were some of the high points. And then we were fortunate enough to work with a very impressive lady who really helped us, was very, very helpful. And we had a coach who also helped us out. And that was, we needed a lot of help. We needed funding. We needed something that was a little bit different. And so, and with the production, so these girls really participated. They attended a workshop, and that was where they were prepared for their roles in the film. And there was a more psychological dimension to really deal with a film.
They never read the screenplay, so we were just trying to submerge them in an atmosphere and work some emotional moments of the movie from their own experience, life experience. So the casting was just an interview. It was like a documentary in which we interviewed each one of the girls. I wanted to know if they could milk a cow, or if they had animals, where they lived, who were their parents, what were their emotional needs, their everyday routine. And then the most important challenge was to create a bond among them so they could share their secrets, and that's how it happened. That was my win when I started filming. They loved each other. They had spent several nights together, and they had built this bond. And for example, the mothers were actresses, but I didn't want to show the screenplay, the screenplay to anybody, because my intuition told me that I should create the movie from their own identity so that they could understand the meaning of each scene, so as to not to limit the meaning of the movie, the richness of the movie. So we arrived at the town of Neblinas. I traveled through many mountains to find this migrant town at 1,800 meters height, and where you have lots of poppy fields. And when we arrived at this town, a few days before we started filming, the girls were able to stay in their homes and playing with their toys, sleeping in their beds, etc. And one of the actresses, the mother, the one who played the mother of Ana, she was concerned about a few things. She told me, please give me this part. I really want to play this part, understand the screenplay. I'm a little bit afraid of the dialogues. Maybe she was afraid of forgetting the lines, but it was important to have a starting point. My only guiding force was working with reality, with characters that were real, real people in real environments.
Y bueno, y le dije que no, le puse una tarea, ¿no? Le dije, no,
So I
no
gave her a
necesitas
homework. I didn't want to give her the
guión,
screenplay.
lo siento
I
mucho,
told
y
her,
tú
you will not
este
have a
lunes
screenplay. I'm
vas a
so
tener una
sorry,
tarea de
but I'll
investigación.
give you
Entonces
a
tienes que
homework
irte a meter a la
to
casa
do
de la
some
vecina
research. So you have to go to the
y
neighbor's
aprender
house
todo de ella,
and
cómo se
learn
siente,
everything
cómo
about
habla,
her,
cómo
how
lava
she
los
feels,
trastes,
how
cómo
she
hace la
talks, how
comida,
she
cómo habla
washes
con
the
su
dishes, how
marido
she
que está en
prepares a
Estados
meal,
Unidos,
how
porque es
does
un
she
pueblo
talk to her
migrante,
husband in the US,
¿sí?
because
Hay
it
toda
is a
una línea
migrant's
narrativa
town. So that
de
was her
migración
homework
en
instead
la
of reading the
película
screenplay.
y
And migration is a big part of the
fue
movie.
fascinante para
So it
ella
was
realmente.
fascinating
O sea, empezó muy conflictuada
for
y
this
al
actress.
segundo,
At the
tercer
beginning,
día
she
ya
didn't
estaba
know how
emocionadísima,
to go about it, but the
conocía
second
la
day she was
intimidad de
very
la
excited. She
vecina y
knew
comía
the
con ella y
neighbor
sabía sus secretos
very well. She
y
knew her
sabía cómo
secrets.
hablaba por teléfono y
They
cómo
ate
se
together.
conducía
They
con los
shared
hijos y tal, cómo iban al río
experiences. They went to
esa fue
down to
como la
the river
investigación
together.
para
So that was
construir al
her
personaje de
research,
Anita.
her homework
Y bueno, y así un
to do
poco
the
por
movie.
todo. Yo me tuve que adaptar a un aparato muy
So
grande de la
I had
ficción
to
y a
get used to
departamentos de
a big
producción, diseño,
apparatus of
producción, vestuario,
fiction,
maquillaje, tiempo.
makeup, different
Pero a la vez,
techniques, etc.
hablando mientras
Yeah, but at
te
the same
escuchamos
time,
contar esto,
while I was
como que da la
listening to
impresión que
you,
sigues
it
manteniendo
gives
un
us
poco
the
esa mirada
impression that you're
documental, ¿no?
still
Esa
keeping this
especie de
documentary point of
trabajo en el
view,
que estás abierta a que la
this
realidad
line of work
invada
in which you are
el
open to
proyecto
realities.
constantemente. Y te quería preguntar por qué esa
And
película
I
ya la
wanted to
tienes
ask
terminada
you,
y de repente
because
ya
you
estás de
finished
nuevo
this
trabajando en
movie,
un nuevo
and then
proyecto,
all of a sudden you're
el
working on a
ECO,
new
y
project.
que como comentabas antes era un proyecto,
And
lo
as
habías
you said
anticipado, que
before,
venía de lejos, que
this
tuviste que poner en
project
paréntesis
was
para
in
el
the back
rodaje
of your head
de
and you
Noche
had
de
to put
Fuego,
it on pause
y
so that you
como que
could
había esta necesidad un poco de
film Noche
limpiar
de
toda la
Fuego.
oscuridad, ¿no? de
And you
Tempestad,
had
¿no?
this
Como que había
need
un
of
agotamiento ahí
clearing
físico y
up this
emocional
darkness
y
of
había que encontrar
Tempestad.
algo un poco más,
You were
más luminoso. Es una
emotionally
vuelta
drained
al
and you
documental.
wanted to find something more cheerful to work on. Could you talk
Sí,
a
es
little
una
bit more
vuelta al
about that?
documental también después de Noche
Yes,
de
this is a
Fuego
return to the
y de tener
documentary.
esta
And
presión tan
Noche de
grande que
Fuego
implica el dinero de lo que cuesta una película de
put
ficción
me
y
under a
el
lot
tiempo
of pressure,
que
especially to
funciona de
find
otra
funding.
forma. Tenía yo una enorme necesidad
I needed
de volver a pisar la tierra,
to go back
de
to the
volver
land,
a mirar a los ojos a la gente, de volver a observar.
to look at people in the eyes and
Como que la
observe
observación es la
the
base
realities. Observation for me is
para mí del
extremely
cine, o
important.
sea, que ahí radica
When
el
I make a
poder
movie,
atrapar la delicadeza,
that's
los
where the
detalles
power
de la
lies
vida y
in,
yo
in the details of everyday
necesitaba
life.
regresar a esto y retomé este proyecto que se quedó
And that's why I restarted this
estacionado,
project that
que
had
se
been
llama El
put
Eco
aside.
y que ahora
It's
viene
called The
adelante, que es un
Echo.
largometraje documental, aunque yo
It
estoy
is a
haciendo la
documentary.
escaleta de otra ficción porque siento que esta peli de ficción me
And I
fortaleció,
feel that
siento
this
que me puedo
fiction
mover libremente ya,
film has strengthened me
que me puedo
as
mover
a
libremente en
filmmaker,
ambos
because it allowed
territorios
me to move
y
freely
que
in both
finalmente
territories,
porque
fiction
una
and
película es una
documentaries.
película independientemente de que sea
A movie is a
documental o
movie,
ficción, ¿no? Pero ahorita estoy
regardless.
instalada en el universo
And
de la
now I'm
infancia,
working on
en un
the
pueblo también perdido en
childhood,
medio de la
on
nada, no sé
childhood, the
por qué me
universe
gusta
of
meterme
childhood.
en lugares
I have no idea
perdidos en medio
why
de la
I
nada.
always look for
Es un
the
pueblo
most
donde no hay
remote
camino,
places,
donde no hay internet, no hay señal
God-forsaken
telefónica, no hay
places where there's
agua,
no internet, there's no
en la
drinking
sierra
water.
norte de
But
Puebla,
I
en las
really
faldas de
like
la
to work
sierra, o sea, lo que se
on
llama el
those
eco, y es una historia
territories.
también sobre lo que
And
significa
that's where
crecer en el
the
ámbito
echo
campesino,
takes place,
sobre lo que significa descubrir la brutalidad del mundo adulto,
where we see
sobre las
a lot of
palabras que nos
violence,
heredan los padres
brutality,
en esa época de la vida y que se quedan guardadas,
and what
y lo que
children
significa
inherit from their
sobrevivir
parents, and what it means to
ámbito
survive
rural de
in
México.
these rural areas,
Y el
abandoned
contexto es
places.
fundamental, ¿no?
And this
Toda la
context is
historia va a estar
fundamental.
permeada
That's where the
por el
story
paisaje
happens.
que cambia drásticamente con cada estación
And
del
the
año,
landscape
por
keeps
el clima
changing
que es muy
drastically
hostil,
because because of the hostile climate, the lots of storms. And I really hope hope to start filming during rainy season. I will follow 3 families in the course of a year, and the protagonists will be children. After the rainy season, we'll have a very cold winter. Families are not prepared to face these low temperatures. Then they have drought, which is the most dramatic part of the year because children cannot take showers, they have hygiene problems, they get lice. You have windstorms and you don't have access to drinking water. There's more illnesses, but there's resistance of people. And it's a very interesting universe, full of elements to tell a story. So I'm working on that, and I'm trying to see how I'm going to do it. I really hope that I'll be able to build the feelings, the sensations that I want to achieve. There's a clip that I sent to you in which you have a brief overview of the narrative that I want to achieve with this movie. And the other important thing I wanted to mention is that this is, for me, a new challenge, a new narrative challenge, where I want to step away from what I've done before. I will not be using voice off. I've had enough of voice off with this exploration, and I would like to move on to something else now. Just observing and telling a story through the situations that I've been able to capture. Okay, so we're going to move on to the clip now, and we'll talk about it.
Camaleón. Un camaleón, Lulma. Un camaleón. Ya se me escapó. ¿Dónde lo asustaste? Ahí está, mira. Esponjosito. Ya se estaba durmiendo, acarícialo y se duerme.
Ya me asustó.
¿Por aquí?
Ajá. Está bajito tantito.
¿Por aquí?
Ajá.
Hacia arriba.
¿Vas tú, Manuel? Para tú.
Bosco, arriámonos para acá. Dale vuelta ya. Vale.
Ay, ay. No me sale de eso de varias veces.
Gracias, Tatiana, por compartir con nosotros estos.
Thank you very much, Tatiana, for sharing this with us.
Este avance de lo que puede llegar a ser el eco.
The development of what could be the echo.
Tenemos una cantidad
Very interesting. We have several messages and questions coming from our viewers.
Así que Javier va a leer uno de ellos.
I'll give the floor to Javier so he can read some of these messages. We have here lots of fans. Everybody's praising your work. There's a girl named Daisy who would like to know a little bit more about how do you work simultaneously the sound and the image. Do you have a preconceived strategy when you work on the images and the footing? Because we've talked a lot about the sound, but what about the footing, the images?
Sí, como dije antes,
Yes, like I said before,
dos discursos independientes.
We have here two independent discourses. In the tiniest place, this happened almost accidentally because I decided that it would be a voice-off movie. And for Tempestad, I tried to take this element as far as I could. So during the shooting, we had the interviews on one side, and from the interviews, I was not trying to go for an image. When you do your research, you know what happened to the characters. So the storytelling is there, and then you go looking for those testimonies. But the images during the research, in the case of the tiniest place, or El Lugar Más Pequeño, I interacted with all of the main characters and also with the fireflies, the moon, and the forest, and the different images. So The footage is built on the life of the characters on the course of 3 days, for example. So the images happens in structure. It's a process in which everything is created slowly. So I wanted to tell the story of the life of the characters from the present, their everyday lives, and from then go to the past. So these images are made up of all of these elements that you can find in the environment, the night, so that you can accompany the story. In the case of Tempestad, we have the journey, everything that happened on the road, and the circus. The circus is another visual element that is very important because the main character, Monica's mother, the girl who disappeared, she's a clown. She lived her entire life in the circus. And when I made the movie, she was not in the circus. She lives with a very strict security protocol because she's been threatened. Her life has been threatened. And so I knew that we couldn't afford to have a lot of change or movement. We couldn't afford that. So I wanted it to be this way. I wanted the images to be like that. And I think that the circus was a delicious element that allowed me to construct Adela's story. So I'm used to discovering the spaces and inhabit them, absorb them as much as possible, so that from that I can build my story.
Pues nada, me temo que vamos a tener que terminar este encuentro. Ha sido un lujo.
I think that we're going to have to finish this masterclass
siempre con la espera de que podamos repetirlo
due to time constraints, but it has been a pleasure to listen to you. It has been incredible to be able to share with you this important moment. Yes, I echo Javier's words. Thank you so much. We still have so many questions to answer, but we already have so many ideas from what you said. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for getting up so early to be with us today. We are extremely happy to have had this opportunity to have a masterclass with you. It was a masterpiece in Visions du Réel.
Muchísimas gracias.
We are very happy to have this opportunity. Thank you very much. Thank you for reminding me of all my journeys while making these movies. I had forgotten some of these videos, and I had to recover them and remaster them, and it was great to go back in time and be able to show you all that. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tatiana. We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.